Please make yourself comfortable. And it's wonderful to see everybody here. It's very cozy. Tonight we're having Paul Rigo from the DEP. He's a wildlife specialist. And apparently he's very well known. He's been on TV quite a bit recently. And he's going to give us a great presentation on coyotes. So please welcome Paul.
Actually, the one thing I forgot to do is see how large my projection is here. So let me
raise it up a little bit.
a book.
Yeah, a box.
My kingdom for a book.
One enough, you think?
Well, good evening. I think we need 20 volunteers to leave because we're over capacity. Well, tonight I'm going to talk about coyotes, and I will say coyotes, I'll say coyotes. I don't know if either one's correct. I'm going to talk a little bit about their history, a little bit of biology, and a little bit of management. But first start with a true story. My own experience with a coyote. A couple summers ago I was doing yard work on a very hot summer day and I accomplished quite a bit, so I took a break, sat in an easy chair in the backyard in the hot afternoon, and I got out a beverage. And I heard this commotion and squealing and squeaking, and I saw a squirrel dash, and then I saw a coyote chase it, and they came right past me. The coyote grabbed the squirrel in its mouth, and walking back past me, feeling sorry for the squirrel. Coyote hadn't noticed me, so I got up and I grabbed the coyote and I pinned it to the ground, and I took the squirrel from its mouth and let the squirrel go. It was still alive. And then I was starting thinking, that's stupid, because now I have a coyote pinned to the ground. And I was also thinking, well, that's perfectly natural for coyotes to prey on other animals, and I shouldn't have gotten involved. And so I started feeling sorry for the coyote. And so I gave it some of my beverage. And then I let it go. And then I relaxed and I sat back down for a while. And wouldn't you know it, that coyote came back with 2 squirrels. Well, as I said, tonight I'm going to talk about coyotes. They are a very interesting animal. Seems like our interest in animal is proportional to their size. If I was talking about shrews tonight, probably wouldn't have quite the crowd. But they're an interesting animal because they have an interesting history. People have a lot of different views and attitudes towards them. And interesting biology. I always feel like I should throw this diagram in my talks because it does a good job of representing of what I get involved with. I'm a wildlife biologist, and ideally I'd be working with wild animals and their habitat and that balance, that relationship. But the reality is a lot of these outside influences come into play in the work that we do. Disease. I get involved with rabies in the state. Land. Connecticut's a very developed state. It's always been an issue about land development in the state, especially for those people that are conservation-minded. Politics is important. But really, the biggest part of my job is people. Working with people that have different attitudes, different knowledge bases, and different understanding of wild animals. And I spend a lot of my talking to people in my office on the telephone, now communicating by email, and sometimes even coming out on a nice night and giving a presentation. I sometimes joke that there's probably a sociologist out there that's sitting there researching animals all the time, what a biologist wishes to do. So coyotes. Interesting animal, interesting history in the state. They're an animal that now is found throughout North America, throughout much of Canada, down in through Latin America and Mexico. This map, some of these color codes, don't pay attention to them. This needs to be updated, but they're abundant throughout much of their range. It's thought that before the 1900s, this was coyote range. Coyotes only found west of the Mississippi River Valley. So, from our point of view, no coyotes in this part of North America, in the eastern third of North America. But something happened, something changed, and they started expanding their range. Part of that was northward, part of it was southward and eastward, or westward, excuse me, but perhaps the most dramatic expansion has been eastward towards us, and it's felt that this range expansion started in the early 1900s to 1930s. And this is a good representation of the current range of coyotes in North America. All of the United States, except for Hawaii, and, well, I can't say and Alaska. Much of Alaska does not have coyotes, but much of the 48 contiguous United States have coyotes. So they've been a very successful species. They've expanded their range. And this range expansion, we believe, hit Connecticut about the 1950s. That's probably the first period in our history that we had coyotes. They're not a native species to our state. They moved in. I think one of my colleagues came and talked about invasive exotic species. Well, coyotes are an invasive exotic species. They're not a plant, but they're and from our perspective, they're exotic. This is a photo that was stored in our office in a box in our files of a gentleman with a dead coyote. It actually was shot by a hunter. But what's striking to me is they took a photo of it, and they put it in our records. And we don't do that today. And back in 1963, when this photo was taken, I imagine coyotes were not such a common species. Perhaps parts of the state they were rare. So it was very notable for some to encounter, see a coyote. So notable that they would document it, maybe write a memo about it. A memo from perhaps a conservation officer to a biologist, or a forester to a biologist about this occurrence. Road, it's not a real exceptional thing. You might, I know if I see one on my way to work, write a memo to anybody about it. I might just in passing mention it to coworkers that I saw one, but it's really not that extraordinary of an event nowadays. So when they were less common, in the middle of the 1900s, it was a bigger deal to see one. You might ask, well, they were so successful, spread so far, expanded their range, why did this happen? Nobody really knows the answer, but there's some good theories. One is that they're filling a niche, they're filling a job opening left from the removal of a couple of other species that used to be in the eastern United States. And one is timber wolves, and another is cougars. So I'm now in the wildlife division. It used to be the Board of Fish and Game. So when the Board of Fish and Game learned that coyotes were expanding their range, they put this fence up around Connecticut. But it didn't work. So, they're a coyote. What are these animals? What are they? They're in the dog family. Canis latrans is our scientific name. Canis familiaris is our household dogs. And how do you know that you're looking at a coyote if you see an animal run across the road? Well, one thing is they're actually quite a lanky animal. They're not stocky. They're lanky. In the winter, when they have a full winter coat on, they will look much larger because of the long fur. But they're lanky. Things to look for beyond the lankiness is the tail, what we call a bottle brush tail, very full, thick tail. They almost always hold their tail straight, and they almost always hold it in a lowered position. Now, many breeds of dogs have tails that have a curl, and many breeds of dogs have hold above their back. Coyotes are almost always down below a horizontal and straight. The muzzle is just like their lankiness. The muzzle's very thin snout, and relatively large and erect ears. Many breeds of dogs have ears that have a little curl in them or completely flop over. So erect ears, relatively pointed. Coloration is really not a very good characteristic to clue in on. There's a lot of variability. So again, not stocky. Compared to a wolf has a much broader muzzle. The ears appear relatively shorter, rounder, and again, a stockier animal. But I'd say there's probably coyotes out there that are hard to tell, especially if you're just getting a glimpse of it or seeing it from a distance. Unless you have it very close and have a really good appreciation for what the size is, which is not a common situation when you see one in the wild. Some may be hard to tell from other, some breeds of domestic dogs or even a wolf. If you get real close to one and happen to see the top of the tail, there is a scent gland on top of the tail, and almost always marked by a black spot on the top side of the tail. I mentioned color is not the best characteristic to look for. Here's one that's very red. We see them that are almost all blonde. We see them that are very charred over almost their entire body. So there's a lot of variation in their coat color. Some people feel that this is a result of them expanding into a new area, and that having expanded, some of the recessive traits are allowed to be expressed more than from an area where they've been over a longer time. But this would be kind of the average coyote color. Combinations of lights and darks, some browns, not a lot of browns, but kind of a salt and pepper to the pelt. With experience, you can also do a pretty good job of telling a coyote from the track. Especially if you spend, the more experience you get, the better you get at tracking, snow tracking in particular. Many breeds of dogs are stockier than coyotes, and that lankiness of the coyote is expressed all the way down to their footprint. It's a very narrow track versus a dog. Many breeds of dogs have actually quite a wide, fat foot. And so that's another thing you can look at. And often the coyote, all these foot pads are well in front, leading, or toe pads, excuse me, are leading the foot pad. The other thing is behavior. If you're out in the winter time and you get on a track and it's going down the woods road and it just goes straight and it keeps going and it keeps going and it keeps going, versus if you get on a track and it's on the road, but then it goes tree, it goes down across the road and over to another tree, maybe jumps over a log. The first one's more likely to be a coyote. They're doing business. They're business-like when they're out there. They're out not fooling around. Dogs, especially house dogs that people are out walking with, and if you see human footprints, there's a better chance that it's a house. But even then, a dog, they go outside, they're zigzagging, they're going all around. You find a coyote, very often it's just straight line. It's like they have a destination in mind. So, with this fairly new medium-sized predator in the state, we have attempted to gather some of the biological. And one way we've done this is to collect dead coyotes that have been hit by cars, taken by hunters, taken by trappers, and examining them. And we've done this a couple times over the last 25 years. And the best group that we examined was in the neighborhood of 25 years ago. And so we're trying to answer some basic questions. This is a new animal, a lot of interest in them, a lot of theories about them. So one thing is, how big are they really? Any guesses how much this one weighed?
45.
120.
125. I heard 65, I heard 40. This coyote weighed 37 pounds. So they look larger than they are, especially with the winter coat on. 37 pounds. But by examining a bunch of coyotes, we found that adult females tend to be in the 30 to 35 pound range, and males about 5 pounds more, 35 to 40. We've examined hundreds of coyotes, and I think we've seen maybe 2 that just barely got over 50 pounds. So if you hear reports of a coyote that was 75 pounds or 90 pounds, maybe take it with a grain of salt, because it's an exceptional rarity. An interesting thing, though, is that the coyotes in the Northeast weigh more than their western counterparts. And this has led to a whole nother spin-off speculation about them. They average about 5 to 10 pounds more than coyotes in the West. And some people are thinking, wow, is this a new subspecies? Is there, did they breed with dogs? What's going on here? And there has been very good genetic work on coyotes in the Northeast to look at their genetic background. And what has been found is that coyotes in the Northeast do have some amount of wolf mixed in them. And it's believed that when they made their range expansion, especially in the Canadian provinces, they encountered what's known as the Algonquin wolf. And there's some interbreeding. I can't put a percentage on it, not dramatic, but there is some wolf lineage in the coyotes in the Northeast. On the contrary, in the Northeast, very little evidence of interbreeding with dogs. We're also interested in their foods. Here's this new animal roaming our landscape. How do they make their living? What do they eat? Here's the stomach contents from one coyote. And this is one of their staple foods, is small mammals, meadow voles. One of their staple foods, especially in the summer months. And so we obtained a coyote, looked in the stomach, and this is what we found. So this coyote got 3, perhaps 4 generations of meadow voles in one meal. And also about this is they're sort of like our pet dogs. If you give your pet dog a small treat, it doesn't go in the corner and sit there and chew it and suck on it and make it last. It's gulp. And that's what, you know, these mice are not very chewed up. They're gulp. They're just gulped. So, and if you have time to spend out in the summer and spring in fields, you may see this behavior. Coyotes out mousing. They're just hunting through the field, and they hear, perhaps even smell or see meadow vole. They jump out, try to pin it to the ground. But they are notorious for having a variety of foods, having a plastic diet, a very variable diet. They will eat insects. They'll eat grasshoppers, crickets. They eat all varieties of berries. A friend of mine that did a lot of research on coyotes in Maine, in the down east portion of Maine where blueberries are grown commercially, found, and these are low bush blueberries, they're just big fields with low bushes of blueberries. Found that when the blueberries ripen, the coyotes are eating almost 100% blueberries.
Way to go.
So all varieties of berries, but they can eat larger animals. They will kill deer. They will prey on fawns, and they can kill deer during the winter. So, and that shows up more in the winter diet, because many of these other foods are available in the winter. Berries aren't available. The small mammals might be covered with snow or burrowed under the ground more. So deer becomes more important in the winter. But they just have a very broad diet. We've had reports of them coming into yards and eating apples, coming into gardens and eating sweet corn that's standing in a garden. So, very broad diet. And they love to scavenge. They don't pass up a free meal. If a deer dies from another cause, or another animal dies from another cause, say it's a farmer's cow that dies and is, dragged into the backfield, coyotes are right there to take advantage of it. This is one of our findings on looking in stomachs of coyotes, and the big, this is percent occurrence, so a lot of deer. Now, one problem with this is our sample was biased towards the winter. We don't have an even sample through the year. But, so in the winter months, deer becomes more important. But one thing to notice is all the different foods that they use. We have small mammals. This would probably be much higher in the summer, and deer would be lower. Berries, squirrel, turkey, bird, raccoon, possum, corn, acorn, grain. Just a very opportunistic eater. We're also interested in what their reproductive rates are. You know, how fast are they reproducing? And this is a reproductive tract from a female coyote, and each one of these bumps we call a placental scar, and each one of those bumps represents where a fetus attached to the placenta and could have been in the litter of this coyote. And this one happened to have nine of these bumps. By looking at a bunch of these, and again, this work was done over 20 years ago, we found an average of 7. So at birth, the litter size may approach 7. Now that could have changed in the last decades as coyotes have filled in their range, but they are capable of having large litters that virtually every adult female breeds every year. We're also interested in disease. This is a heart of a coyote with a pretty good infestation of heartworm. This is the same heartworm that we give our dogs medication to prevent. They're also susceptible to other diseases. We receive many reports of coyotes with mange, just quite prevalent. And I think right now, I think it's somewhat reflective of there being a very abundant animal. Disease is easier to be spread amongst an abundant population. But an extreme case of mange, and I think this results in mortality of many of our coyotes, probably especially the young of the year. I can't get beyond the subject of disease without talking about rabies, and raccoons remind me of rabies because that's the strain of rabies that we have in Connecticut. Well, commonly rabies. Raccoons are the primary carrier. And again, this is old, but just think of the percentage. Some 4,000 raccoons up to the point that this information was summarized, and 3 coyotes. So coyotes are not very susceptible to the strain of rabies that we have. Occasionally there is a rabid coyote, but it's quite rare. And they're not a secondary carrier, they're just very low susceptibility. Now in other parts of the country there's other strains where coyotes are a primary carrier. In the Texas, in the Southwest, there's these where coyotes are a common carrier. But we don't have that strain, thankfully. So now a little bit about the social structure. How are they grouped? How do they go through the year? This is a coyote that's in a trap. It's about to have a radio collar put on it, so its movements can be followed. And there's been some good work, telemetry studies on coyotes in New England, in Maine, and Massachusetts, and Vermont. We have not conducted this type of research in Connecticut, but we think that their findings should be quite applicable to Connecticut. So what's found is that coyotes, their social unit around an adult pair. A male and a female adult, and each adult pair defends a territory. So here's an adult pair, here's an adult pair, and these territories don't have a lot of overlap. They're fairly exclusive. They're a territorial animal. And each will have a litter in the spring, late winter and spring, and that could be perhaps up to 7 animals. And then that litter stays in their territory through the fall. There's a lot of mortality in young coyotes. So you get into the fall and winter, they have 3 to 5 of those young left, plus the adult pair, so a total of 5 to 7 animals. But then those young start to disperse. Typically, most of them disperse. Every once in a while, one will hang on into the next spring, but there's a lot of dispersal. And then the next year, the process starts over again. So the one thing about being territorial, there's only so many that can fit in a given area. So there's some self-limitation through territoriality. Just like if we had pies, if we had apple pies, and there's only so many pies we could fit on this table, and then we tried to put another one on, one would fall off. Is there apple pie, by the way? Another interesting thing that's found is the relationship between coyotes and other predatory animals. A number of studies have found that coyotes seem to somehow limit or displace red foxes. So where there's coyotes, red foxes tend to occur in these gaps, in the spaces between home ranges. Some people think that red foxes are a little bit more adaptable to people. Coyotes a little bit less adaptable, so if red foxes move into some situations, they might be able to make a living there and maybe not be hassled by coyotes. There has been research on the relationship of coyotes and bobcats, and that doesn't follow the same pattern. There's broad overlap. So if they are competing, it's not in a spatial way. It's not a spatial landscape competition. They could compete in other ways, perhaps by food sources. Very little evidence that there's competition, at least on a spatial consideration. There's not much known about gray foxes and coyotes. We do have gray foxes in Connecticut, and we have red foxes. But I don't know of good research that's been done looking at how coyotes might affect gray foxes. Gray foxes tend to be a more southern species than red foxes, and I haven't seen research that has looked at that. So they have these territories, an adult pair that they defend, and they use a variety of habitats. And here's, this is the suburbs of Chicago. And here's a coyote making a living in that part of the suburbs. Here's a coyote making a living there. And this is the same one here. Coyotes have been very successful. They have high reproduction. They eat a bunch of different foods. And as a result, they do seem to manage to live in quite a wide variety of habitats. And even some surprising areas. This is quite a developed area near Chicago and coyote. We definitely see this in Connecticut. We receive lots of calls from our developed towns, especially our coastal towns, with reports of coyotes, concerns about people seeing coyotes frequently. It's really a common issue for us. In fact, one of the coastal towns is hoping that we can come and give a talk like this to their town officials and perhaps some of their public about coyotes. So pair bonded, they tend to mate for life, but in wild animals there's a lot. A 6-year-old coyote would be a pretty old coyote. They can live longer than that, but there's a lot of mortality factors in the wild. But pair bonded, they have They have a litter in April, primarily in April, and through the summer and into the fall, as I mentioned, there's a lot of mortality. A lot of mortality we just don't see. A lot of wild animals, we just don't see the mortality. I have a rhododendron bush in my front yard. Every year it seems there's a robin nest in there, and every year that robin has 2 clutches. Next year, there's a pair of robins. Where did all those other robins go? There's mortality that we just don't see. So as the time goes on, the litter gets smaller, there's mortality. Then in the fall and winter, there's a reversal. A lot of these young coyotes take off looking for their own territories, probably a process that leads them into more mortality. And if they're perhaps lucky, they'll find an open territory. So one thing about the territories, and they're territorial, you can start to estimate how many coyotes there might be in an area. And this is just an attempt to do that. From telemetry studies, in Maine, telemetry studies, territories of 17 square miles. A 17 square mile apple pie. The Adirondacks 15, but then in some urban areas, like in Chicago, some of those home ranges are only 2 square miles, a 2 square mile apple pie. So how many 17 square mile pies or 2 square mile pies could you fit on a table? So in Connecticut, I would say roughly a happy medium, a good estimate, reasonable estimate is maybe 10 square miles per territory. And each of those territories in the winter probably has in the neighborhood of 2 adults, 3 to 4 pups, maybe a couple transient animals out there that aren't in their territories. And so you add this up and you might have 7 coyotes per 10 square miles in the beginning of the winter. If we say 10 square miles, well, Connecticut's 5,000 square, that would be 500 territories, if they're 10 square mile territories. But certainly all of Connecticut isn't completely suitable for coyotes. They don't live in Bushnell Park, they don't live in Bridgeport. So anyways, you go through this mental exercise, and 400 home ranges might be reasonable, but we don't know for sure. This is all just a mental exercise. This isn't from actual research we've done. So if you had 400 home ranges and 7 coyotes, that's in the neighborhood of 3,000 coyotes in the state. And again, that's not gospel. It might be half that, it might be double that. What's the best coyote habitat? Well, in the summertime they like fields. That's where they find small mammals. These brushy areas, these edges of fields, that's where you find berries. This is also a very good spot to find other prey that are important, like rabbits and woodchucks. Happens to be also a very good situation for deer. So something like this, I would say, is not a bad situation for a coyote. A field with brushy edges, maybe throw in some wetland. Doesn't have to be a wetland, but so diversity with a fair amount of open space. Who has a yard bordered by woods? So somebody's got a house with a nice view, and they've got this. They've got the field, they've got the edge, although they've cleaned it up. They don't have as much brush as coyotes would like. But, you know, it's a good situation. So it's not surprising that some of our kind of suburban or rural suburban areas are pretty good habitat for coyotes. So there's issues with them. We field calls almost every day with people with concerns and problems with coyotes. They do attack livestock. We do not have a large livestock industry in Connecticut, but we do have reports every year of various types of livestock being attacked by coyotes. A bigger issue in Connecticut, because we are not an agricultural state, and we're definitely more of a suburban state, I guess. Pets. Attacks on pets are very common, especially cats. We receive lots of reports of this. They also attack dogs, not as frequently, but they will attack dogs. And I say the smaller the dog, the greater the danger, but not even a 100-pound dog is completely immune from being attacked by coyotes. This is old. This is well over 10 years old, but I just wanted to, show that we receive complaints from all over the state, problems from all over the state. I'd say what did this, our coastal towns really would predominate in the towns that we receive from. A lot of reports from our coastal towns. A lot of those towns have good habitat and a higher human population density. So more opportunity for coyotes to get in trouble. So what can you do if you're having issues with coyotes? Well, this isn't necessarily a progression, but it's different options. If you have something that's attracting coyotes, remove it. Sometimes they come into fruit that's fallen from a fruit tree in your yard. Some people put food out, bread out for wild animals. Coyotes will eat that. They'll come and sometimes eat dog food out of the dog food bowl outside. So remove food attractants. Exclusion works very well for protecting certain things like pets. If you have a good fence or the pet's in a kennel, it's insurance that coyotes aren't going to create a problem. Frightening can be attempted, particularly noise. Some people think that odors, unnatural odors, can perhaps break a coyote's habit of coming near a house or a yard. Possibly modifying the habitat. If you have just great rabbit habitat in your yard, it's a great place for coyotes to hunt. So maybe modifying the habitat so it doesn't have that nice brush layer that's so good for rabbits. Supervision works. People call us, they're worried about going out with their dog, and it's very rare that a coyote will attack a dog that's closely supervised and on a leash. But if you're out there and the dog's off the leash and it's 100 yards, 80 yards away, more apt that the coyotes will take advantage of that versus having the dog right next to the person. And actually removing the coyotes. This is an option. We have very liberal hunting seasons for coyotes, and there is trapping allowed for coyotes, although that's much more restricted. But there are options for actually removing the coyotes. We do not allow coyotes to be relocated, so if somebody is, when I say remove, I'm talking lethally remove, not trying to trap them and put them somewhere else. So that, I believe, is the end. These aren't my skulls, but somebody brought them in. I think they're trying to test me. I'm going to call these coyote skulls, and this a bobcat skull.
That's a bobcat skull, yes.
One interesting thing, if you have the lower jaws,
I do. Go ahead.
I talked about tracking, and you can get into tracking and study animals through tracking, you can also study animals at their skulls. And you can, if you, and probably both of us, were given a skull that we really never saw that animal before, probably make some assumptions on how it makes a living. Canines, typically for predators, but not exclusively. This animal has very reduced dentition. It doesn't have big molars. It's got just sharp teeth all the way back, and these teeth, along with the lower jaw, act like shears or scissors.
Can you hold it up a little higher?
And bobcats are a very pure predator. They don't eat the berries and corn, pumpkin, things like that coyotes eat. So their dentition reflective of a predator. Piercing the prey, shearing.
That broke, so I dropped it, and that's why that thing is perfect.
You might also, predators, many of the predators tend to have eyeballs that are situated forward on their skull. So the coyote, and also we had the jaw, and if we had the jaw articulated in here, we would find that it's a very tight hinge, no slop in the hinge. See that? That's slop. A bobcat can't do that. A bobcat just can't, a cow can. And what's a cow doing? It's grinding its food. A bobcat just grabs its prey and cuts the meat off. And that teeth, that's the same teeth that, well, you'll see a cat, and even your dog uses that pair of teeth on the side. When they're cutting something, they turn their head sideways and cut that. So a bobcat, or coyote, also has the canines.
Okay. That canine came from a different skull, so it's not the right size for it. But this one is the original.
Neighbor tooth. But you'll notice that this animal, this coyote, has much flatter, has something that's approaching molars. So much more for grinding. Adaptable to a more diverse diet. If we had a bear skull here, we'd see even better molars than this on the bear, which does eat mostly plant material. And this jaw wouldn't be hinged quite as tightly as the bobcat. So,
Yeah, I found these off of Leadgett Road. Someone had popped off maybe about half a dozen of them,
Yep.
and across them. And these were the best two skulls available. And actually, as I told you, I took a fang from another skull that was in worse shape just to put it in. The bobcat was roadkill. That a friend of mine found and buried and let me have the skull afterwards.
Yep. Which one might use sense of smell a little bit more for hunting? Bobcats are ambush predators more, and more use sight. But coyotes use their nose too. So. I do have a coyote pelt that I'll get it stationed out there, so as people are leaving they can look at it a little bit more closely. But this is a winter coat, and this again is probably a very typical, as typical as they can be. There is a lot of variation, as I said, in coat color. But, very pretty, I'd say this is pretty typical of a coat color. So,
How old would you say that he is?
no idea. I think it is older than one, but beyond that, I don't know. So,
Do coyotes have natural predators here in Connecticut, other than humans?
no, there's nothing that preys on coyotes here. I talked about that relationship between coyotes and
We don't have.
red foxes, how coyotes tend to displace red foxes. And it's not exactly known how that occurs, whether they're actually preying on them, killing them, chasing them, or maybe it's just olfactory and the foxes smell a coyote and don't want to be there. But somehow it occurs. That same relationship exists between wolves and coyotes. So where they coexist, wolves tend to displace coyotes. So I'm going to hand this off and get it. Is there a spot out there to
Yeah.
set up?
Yeah, sure.
Set it up? Or
Yeah.
it'll take all night just to pass it down the road. I guess I have time for, Sue, I can have time for some questions?
Yes, definitely.
Yes.
Has anyone ever domesticated coyote?
People have kept them captive, but they don't domesticate one. Very tractable.
You only have 2 adults, and how is it that 2 small adults really can go after deer versus a wolf pack that has 4 or 5 large animals that kill that prey? How do 2 40-pound coyotes kill a 100-pound deer? The deer is ill.
They're very good predators. That's one thing. I believe a single coyote, especially a single male coyote, can kill a deer. We've found places where bobcat have killed deer, and heaviest bobcat I've ever examined in Connecticut is 39 pounds. The average bobcat's closer to 25 pounds. Certain snow conditions in particular favor coyotes as a predator on deer. Deer sink in certain types of snow. And there's certain types of snow where the coyotes can cruise very easily and the deer can't cruise as well.
Okay, last question. In Texas, you get a range, they shoot a coyote, they hang him on the fence, and they claim that carcass keeps away other coyotes. Is that a myth or is that the truth, do you know?
I've never read anything.
You see them hanging up in ranches all over.
I've never read anything that has shown that that's effective or not.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with any research that's examined that.
Okay.
So, yes. Do they protect their pups? Not very. It's probably against certain animals. Probably against any other dog-like animal, foxes, other coyotes. They probably do. When humans come close to a coyote den, the coyotes tend to hang around the edge, usually out of sight, but they do hang around. Sometimes a wolf at some time. She's taking notes. Well, you all feel bad. So, yes.
How strong is the coyote than the bobcat?
Which one's stronger, coyote or bobcat? I don't know that answer. They both have a very powerful bite. They have very strong jaw muscles. And I will bet somebody's tried to count the muscles of the jaw, but I really don't know the answer. I would guess pound for pound bobcat. Just they definitely, I know from experience, bobcats are just quite a compact, strong animal. And bobcats use their feet more, and I think their legs are thicker and stronger too. But, yes.
I was wondering, when you hear coyote, sometimes it sounds like there's about 50 of them, and sometimes when I've tried out west, not here, I've tried to follow where the sound is, and I came on one coyote, and I was wondering if the sound of coyotes, if one can sound like there were many, or
No, I don't think that's the case. My belief with the vocalizations is, people that study this will probably tell you there's 20 different vocalizations, but I broadly say that I'm familiar with kind of two broad vocalizations. One is the plaintive, long howl they hear in the westerns, the hoo 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 hoo. It sounds like a single coyote, and you picture a full moon. Single long howl. But then there's, and many people have experienced what you described, lots, it sounds, to me, I describe it as a pack of poodles. And it seems to be more common in the spring and summer. And it sounds like a pack of poodles, and it's very abrupt. It's very energetic. Very repetitive, and it does sound like a bunch of little poodles. And the other thing about it is usually it just stops abruptly too. It goes alone. I would say, I can certainly not say never. I can't say no danger. I could say the statistics would tell you that the danger is extremely low to a child outside alone, but at the same time, there's been now 2 cases, I believe, of people being killed by coyotes continent-wide, which is, I mean, historical, in history, 2 cases. One child in California, and I don't know the age of the child, I think it was a toddler, and I believe a 20-year-old woman in Canada. People being injured have been from habituated coyotes, coyotes that for some reason had gotten used to people, probably because they have been fed and just got very comfortable around people.
And he seems that the donkey does a good job keeping the coyotes away from his beef cattle and his young calves.
I'm not familiar with donkeys. There's certainly breeds of dogs that are, good guard dogs. There's one breed particularly for sheep. I can't remember the name of it, but it looks like a sheep, and it's not raised like a dog. It gets very little human contact. It acts pretty wild, but it's a very good guard dog for sheep. Other breeds of dogs are good. So I think llamas, if I'm not mistaken, against the coyote, just by your presence, perhaps. But then, even beyond that, you then can yell at the coyote. You could throw things at it. But if you let your dog go, it goes, and the coyote goes with it, and who knows?
Do you ask us to report those kind of instances?
We are a 501c nonprofit, and any donation that you can make through volunteer work, membership, we have a jar that you can donate in, would be very much appreciated. And our next speaker series is on November 26th with wild turkeys. And we promise to make less sardine-like. But please come out. It'll be in the center of Hartland in this area. One last thing, you can watch this program, Community TV, both on TV and on the web. You can go to their website. I'd like to give Paul a little momentum from the Land Trust, which is one of our Land Trust decals. They were very nice, and we're very proud of them. Thanks again.